and welcome to Cheers to Fears, where we take horror films and turn them into drinking games. We're your two hosts. I'm Tucker.
And I'm Alex. Today we are going to be making a drinking game for The Birds, directed by Alfred Hitchcock and written by Daphne du Maurier, who wrote the book. However, Evan Hunter was the person who put together the screenplay. Delee Farrow, Tucker's mom, was the one that suggested that we do another Alfred Hitchcock movie, so we landed on The Birds for her suggestion. So thank you for the suggestion, and if you have a movie that you want us to review, leave it in the comments below.
In The Birds, Melanie is visiting a bird store and she bumps into Mitch, who gives her a hard time about her past. They act so passive-aggressive towards each other that you can feel the romance. Melanie decides to pull a prank on Mitch by giving his younger sister lovebirds for her birthday, which is less of a prank and more of a good deed. She's convinced him to staying a few extra days in Bodega Bay and finds out that killer birds are in the small town.
Now let's move on to the spoiler warning. This is a movie that was released almost 60 years ago, so we will not have any regrets about spoiling this movie. If you do not want that, however, we recommend that you watch the movie for yourself with our drinking rules that are posted on screen now. With that being said, let's move on to the rule breakdown.
So of course, our first rule as always is death, and for this movie, it gave us 4 deaths. And I'm going to be honest, I didn't expect there to be 4 deaths. I thought maybe 1 or 2 at most, just because it's from the 60s, and I didn't know that there would be at least a handful of them. So I was kind of shocked to find that out, I guess.
Yeah. No, I kind of expected there to be, if not even more deaths, just because it is like, I don't want to say a slasher movie, but a movie where people are expected to die. However, in saying that, all the deaths were either very gruesome or not at all.
Yeah, and like almost boring in some cases.
Oh yeah, like Annie's death was super boring. It was just kind of her sitting on the ground there. You didn't really see anything.
Yeah.
And then there's the other one where the guy gets blown up.
Oh yeah, the gas pump.
And then the gas pump, yeah. And then of course there's the other one where his eyes are pecked out.
Yeah, that was my favorite kill. Probably a lot of people's favorite kill in the movie.
Oh yeah.
Just because of how gruesome and gory it was, especially for the 60s.
Yeah, it's so easy, but as you said again, it's not really expected for the 60s.
Yeah.
Moving on to our next rule is screams, cries, or yells. If you hear one of these, you take a sip, and we got a total of 11.
Forgive me. This business with the Bears has upset me. I don't know what I'd do if Mitch weren't here.
That total is actually a lot lower than we were expecting.
Yeah, it sounded like there was a lot more screaming in the movie, I thought, but I guess that was just the birds screaming around, which actually leads us perfectly into rule number 3. It's whenever you hear the birds squawking. And this happened a lot more times, giving us 19 sips. And this is very, very easy to notice when it's going on, especially because there's no soundtrack in the movie. This is essentially the soundtrack.
Yeah, it's very prominent, I would say.
Oh, it definitely is.
Kind of annoying at times, but
yeah.
I mean, it's birds, what do you expect?
Yeah.
Next up is rule number 4, which is whenever you see blood, you take a sip. And this came to a total of 9 times.
Yeah, and it generally happened whenever the birds attacked, obviously.
Yeah.
But anyways, moving on to rule number 5, it's whenever you see a flock of birds. And this rule ended up giving us 25 sips.
So for obvious reasons, we couldn't have a drink whenever you saw a bird, because it would be mercied in almost every scene, I think.
Well, you wouldn't make it through the movie if you're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it could just be a singular rule on its own.
Yeah, if that's the only rule you want to play with, just drink for every bird. You're still going to be drinking a lot more than you want to if you do that.
Yeah.
There's probably thousands of birds in this movie.
Oh, thousands for sure. Now let's move on to rule number 6, which is whenever you sense tension between Mitch and Melanie, you take a sip, which came to a total of 6 sips.
Yeah, and this one can kind of be left up to interpretation. Obviously, it's up to you, basically, when it happens. So take our number with a grain of salt. You might get a slightly different number, but it's around 6 for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, wait a minute. I don't know you.
But I know you.
How?
We met in court.
We never met in court or any place
That's true, I'll rephrase it. I saw you in court.
Now on to rule number 7, it's whenever bird is said. And this happened 23 times in the movie.
I hardly think a few birds are going to bring about the end of the world.
These weren't a few birds.
I didn't know there were many crows in Bodega Bay this time of year.
And I guess just as a disclaimer, we count birds as well.
Yeah, if it's pluralized.
If it's pluralized, yeah. So we should add that. Now let's move on to rule number 8, which is whenever the birds attack, you take a sip, which came to a total of 9. And I guess we should add that this completely aligns with the blood rule, as that also had 9 sips.
Yeah, it kind of doubles up every time it happens. So not much to say with that rule. We'll move on to rule number 9. It's whenever there's a name of a bird species that's said, and this happens the most out of any other rule, happening 37 times.
Yeah, I feel like this is the rule that's kind of equivalent to Mother as we had in Psycho for the most part, where one rule just kind of makes the whole list kind of skyrocket and bring it up a full drink.
Yeah, but with this movie, there's definitely a lot more drinking than Psycho because there's a couple other rules that are in the 20s as well, so it helps, balance out the rules a little bit more.
Yes.
Aren't those lovebirds?
No, those are redbirds.
Oh, I thought they were strawberry finches.
And moving on to our 10th and final rule, whenever a bird breaks glass, you take a sip, which came to a total of 5 sips. This happened actually quite a bit less than I thought it would be, and I feel like that's just bias, because I remember when I was young, we used to have a big front window, and I'm pretty sure every 3 months or so, a bird would run into it and die.
But didn't break the glass.
It never broke the glass. It was pretty thick.
Yeah, so that could be why their windows weren't breaking.
Yeah.
Anyways, we'll move on to the totals for this drinking game. The total amount of sips that we had to take was 148, which is just under 5 drinks based on our 30 sip per can scale.
Yeah, and I feel like this is kind of night and day compared to Psycho. Psycho is, I'd say, one of our lower drinking games. And this one, I'd say, is not the highest, but I'd say it's borderline one of the harder ones.
Yeah, it's up there with some of the high slasher movies that we have done.
Yeah.
And that kind of shocks me because, I don't know, it seems to be a trend that older movies have less drinks. And I don't know why that is. It's just kind of our trend that we've seen. Yeah. But with this one, it kind of was an outlier and definitely gave us a lot of drinks, which was a nice change of pace for an older movie.
Yeah, definitely.
But anyways, we'll get into the movie itself now, and I guess we'll start with the fact that there was no soundtrack for the movie, which honestly I didn't really notice throughout the movie. There was a couple times where I noticed there was a few scenes that kind of felt like they were dragging without a soundtrack, but for the most part, there was always birds squawking when something crazy was happening, which was a soundtrack in itself, kind of.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I guess the main scene where I wish it wasn't birds squawking, I wish there was some sort of tension music. I think they were in the house and the birds just started to invade when they were boarding everything up. That's the only real time where I kind of wanted a soundtrack, just because it dragged on a little bit too much.
Yeah, or like the same scene kind of when they're sitting around the fireplace just waiting. That especially.
Yeah, that was the scene, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So I agree. That scene needed some more sounds involved because it was too quiet and just dragged on.
Yeah. I guess one thing that they did add in the movie, which I liked for soundtrack, is they had the kids singing a song at one part in the movie when they were all at the school. I feel like that was an interesting way to add a soundtrack without actually having a soundtrack.
Yeah.
So I think this is one of the first movies that took Alfred Hitchcock a long break in between movies, between Psycho and this one. And I feel like he did a good job with this one. And honestly, I prefer this one to Psycho.
Okay. I wouldn't go that far for myself. I do enjoy Psycho a little bit more.
Okay.
I do enjoy this movie too. It is a fun movie to watch and done very well, especially for the time. But I would still give the upper hand to Psycho by a little bit. And one thing I'll give this movie credit for is the thought that went into it and some of the effects at the time. For example, the birds were trained, so that's impressive in itself.
Yeah.
The painted backgrounds, for this day and age, they kind of look like a cheesy green screen, but at the time it was something new and different, I think.
Yeah.
So it was it stood out in a good way at that time. And then everybody running away while on a treadmill, that was a clever idea to make it look like everyone was running.
Yeah.
And like I said, obviously some of the effects up to today's standards is nowhere near what we have today.
Yeah, I'd say if they were done today, I'd be poor, but obviously they were done back in the 60s.
63 it was. So yeah, so it was impressive for the time.
I feel like their performances in the movie are fairly well done, especially Rod Taylor and Tippi Hedren were very good in the movie.
Oh yeah, for sure. For me, Tippi Hedren was the standout role, I guess.
Yeah.
Mitch was obviously a good supporting character. He was kind of a main character, obviously, but obviously Tippi Hedren as Melanie was the main character.
Yeah.
And I felt like she kind of carried the movie, to be honest.
Yeah, she did an incredible job.
And just speaking of Melanie and Mitch, I guess, there was kind of a weird love triangle with them and Annie, because Annie still seemed like she was in love with Mitch, whereas Mitch obviously didn't feel the same way. So it was kind of a weird loose end that they ended up tying up because they killed Annie.
Yeah, just a lazy way.
Yeah, it was a simple way to tie that loose end up, which, I mean, they could have done something different, especially because Annie's death was kind of lame, but whatever, at least they tied it up.
Yeah. And I guess speaking of loose ends, the movie ended very abruptly, at least for me anyways.
Okay.
It was just the sunrise, I guess, when they were carrying Melanie out and they were all going in the vehicle and then they were going to go to San Francisco.
Right.
I feel like nothing's really tied up there. Like, they could have just shown that there was like an imminent doom, I guess. Where I think the original ending was supposed to be a shot of San Francisco Bridge just covered in birds.
Okay.
Which would have been a much better ending. Even just that little bit would have been great, but they didn't really give us anything.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. And you mentioned the imminent threat of doom. And showing the birds on the bridge definitely would have portrayed that message. And it is kind of the message that I got at the end of this movie, but I get what you're saying, how it did kind of just end abruptly.
Yeah. I think my favorite scene of the movie was the scene where they were all at the restaurant and they had just a wacky cast for the most part.
They had a lot of different characters in that scene.
Yeah, like they had, I don't know the name for it, but a girl who knew a lot about birds.
Bird expert? I don't know.
Bird expert, we'll call it that. They say the name in the movie, but I don't remember it.
Yeah.
They had one guy that was just constantly saying it was the end of the world whenever he could.
The town nut, I guess.
Town nut, yeah. He said it so casually, too. Like, it didn't sound insane.
Yeah, I know.
And there was a sailor, and then there was a mother of two that was at a bar. I'm not even sure if it was a bar or tavern.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe it was a restaurant.
Just a restaurant.
Yeah, but either way, her kids were not in school.
Yeah. And then there was obviously the businessman who gets blown up from the gas that leaks around and gets lit on fire. And another moment in that scene that I kind of thought was, it took me by surprise and just made me chuckle a little bit, was when the mother of the two kids was screaming at Melanie about how this is her fault, and all this started when she got to Bodega Bay, and then Melanie just like outright slaps her. I thought that was funny, and it took me by surprise, like I said, and just gave me a little chuckle in the movie.
Nobody really took the mother's side either. Everyone was just kind of standing there and just watched it all happen.
yeah, that's another thing. Nobody really did anything, except Mitch kind of just pulled Melanie away a bit.
Yeah. And I guess just one last thing is, I said how the ending was unsatisfactory to me. It did close with a great shot. Just the sunrise with all the birds there.
Yeah, cinematography-wise.
Yeah, cinematography-wise, it looked great.
Oh yeah, I agree. And that's why I kind of felt the imminent doom that you mentioned was, there's just thousands of birds there, and then the sunrise behind it looked nice, and yeah, it was a cool shot, I do agree. And anyways, now that that's all out of the way, what was your overall thoughts on this film?
I thought the movie was good, obviously. I liked it more than Psycho. Obviously, you think vice versa, and that's fine. They were both fantastic movies. I should say as a disclaimer, a lot of the movies we end up reviewing are good movies for the most part. We generally don't go out of our way for bad movies unless we're just like, we've seen too many good movies, or it's a franchise movie that we've done for way too long. Like, such as, I think, Halloween. There was some pretty bad installments with that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it's obviously going to happen where if we just choose the movie, it's going to be something we want to watch. I will say this was my first time watching The Birds, surprisingly.
Okay.
So I didn't know that I was going to like it. Obviously, I know it's a classic in the horror community and the horror genre. Yeah. And was like kind of groundbreaking in a sense. So I went in with that respect already in my mind. So I kind of knew I was going to at least enjoy it and know where horror came from, kind of thing. So yeah, even though knowing that, I didn't know that it was going to be a great movie, which I thought it was a pretty damn good movie, honestly.
Well, now since we talked about the movie, let's talk about our award ceremony, where we award one not-so-lucky nominee the Darwin Award. This award goes out to a character that made a stupid decision that resulted in them getting killed, somebody else getting killed, or simply resulting in something bad happening that could have been easily avoided. This award can also be given out to a character that is just plain dumb. Here are the nominees.
Today's first nominee is Melanie, for closing herself inside of the room that was filled with birds, instead of not entering room and just closing the door after she saw a million birds in there.
Next, we have the people that went over to help the man that was attacked by a bird at the gas pump. They were on the list for not picking up the gas nozzle to prevent a huge explosion that ended up killing the businessman.
Speaking of which, that leads us to a third nominee, which is the businessman. He's our third nominee for not listening to the crowd of people that are yelling at him, and ignoring them caused his death.
And finally, Annie Hayworth is our last nominee for asking all the children to go outside like it is a fire drill. However, all the birds were outside. That is like saying we should get through the tornado by walking outside and running to the next town over.
And the winner is Annie, for not only putting her life in danger, but putting several children's lives at risk as well.
And with all that being said, we hope you enjoyed our look into the birds. If you ended up playing the game alongside the movie, or if you have any other feedback or suggestions, let us know in the comments below. Also, let us know in the comments below what your favorite Alfred Hitchcock movie is.
Make sure to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next week's episode, where we are going to be making a drinking game for the Driller Killer. If you want to check out our most recent video, click on the box on the top right. Or if you want to see a playlist of all the drinking games and movies we review, click on the box below it. Thanks for tuning in, and this is us saying, cheers to fears.
It's the end of the world.